Hello, everyone. Welcome to another collaboration episode between Baiguan Technology and East 8. My name is Robert Wu. I'm the CEO of Big One Lab and writer at Baiguan Newsletter. With me is our co-host, Johnny Zhou of East A Newsletter on Substack. Johnny is also a top China-based venture capitalist. We should have Zichen of Pekinology today as well, but I think Zichen is super busy with his studies at Princeton right now, so he will not be able to join us for this episode. Johnny and I thought we have to do this episode this time. We missed one last week, and a lot of things have happened in the last 2 weeks that we think it's obligatory for us to do another episode today. Johnny, it seems a lot of things are happening recently about China. What do you think is, for you personally, what do you think is the most important event that is happening to China that has a long-term or very impactful consequences?
Yeah, I would say the openness to talk with the US is still by far the most impactful event in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, we don't know exactly what happened in the back channels, but it seems like the temperature is down quite a bit. Like about 2 weeks ago, the temperature is very high. It's still a very feisty, combative mode. But right now, I think, at least from the official channel, is willing to talk. And Wall Street Journal also reported that it seems like China is willing to talk about fentanyl issues as an opener in order to actually kickstart the talks, right? Which all indicates that China is willing to be on the table. And I believe that the US would take that as a positive signal and will just go along with it. But the there's going to be more drama going ahead. But at least this is a good thing from both a global perspective or from a Chinese perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the way that it is being expressed was also very interesting. So I think it was this Thursday, right? That suddenly in the morning, 7 a.m. or something, two social media accounts had almost exactly the same title. Two very influential social media accounts, right? One is Yuan Tantian. That was the social media account of basically state television, CGTN. Rumor has it that the every article on Yuan Tantian was reviewed by the head of CGTN himself, which I think it totally makes sense. And director Shen Haixiong, right, was also, everyone knows that he has a big career overlap with the boss. And then they have this title called, I think it's something like US are actively approaching China from multiple channels to talk about trade. And that almost exact same title was also featured in another article by Chairman Rabbit, which was also a pretty big political influencer in China. It was obvious if it's just one account, then people would not necessarily know if it's a official messaging, but it's two accounts with almost the same title and with the same message. And the same message was, for most of it, was about America was desperate to talk to China. But then couching all these context was the saying that there's no harm in talking. So then you have the more official recognition of that from Ministry of Commerce and all that. I think this the whole way it was play out was really informative, really educational. It shows how sophisticated that the Chinese government was dealing with this kind of matter. That how can you at the same time don't sound weak, but also have ample information and messaging out that you intend to do something, or at least you intend to be open to something. This is amazing because we don't have a Twitter writing or Truth Social writing president, and we don't want that. But how do you do that? I think this is really amazing that this, if you study it and research about it closely, there's a lot to learn from how Chinese leadership communicates. Yeah, I think that's super amazing.
From a sort of ministry perspective, right? It's not that hard to imagine that different ministry has different agendas. Like for the foreign ministry, I think the overall tone has been pretty hawkish from day one, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Never knew. Yeah.
exactly. The
Yeah.
never kneel thing is it's actually a little bit surprising because the fervor has been gone a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it shows that the ministry is a bit of from a hawkish side. But then you also see that the Ministry of Commerce seems very in the background, right? They're not like, they should be the main negotiating party. Obviously, the negotiating party for any Chinese delegation will be comprised of different ministries. But the Ministry of Commerce is simply the most influential ones when it comes down to tariffs. But I think over the last 1 or 2 months, the overall, I guess the voice volume is muted for Ministry of Commerce, right? And then you have the Hong Kong Administrative Office was an even more hawkish tone, right? Talking about the hillbillies of the Americans, right? And so you can see that different ministries have their different agendas along the line. And I guess this way to break the silence in terms of saying, okay, we have some unofficial or quote unofficial, but actually official channel whereby China is willing to talk is probably the easiest way for the current leadership to stomach. Whereas at the same time, showing the message that we're willing to talk, right? But then the issue still remains is that who's going to be the icebreaker? And then Wall Street Journal has this fentanyl thing, which I think this fentanyl thing has been on and off since Trump won. And it seems like now it's just a way to be an icebreaker, right? But let's see. This could have a lot of progress because there's not a lot of, I would say, obstacle towards doing that. But the thing is, even if you do whatever the US want in terms of from a fentanyl perspective, Trump gonna go back to pre-Liberation Day tariff, or it's gonna be a complicated sort of situation. But I think realistically speaking, even without such talk being taken place, I think both sides have expanded the sort of exemption items or when it comes down to trade and tariff issues. But then the impact is still there. It's still virtually a very high tariff between US and China, which means that the US-China relationship is certainly under a lot of stress right now.
Yeah, and I think there's also the problem of timing, right? I've read about reports of shipping getting stalled between US and China, Chinese ships docking around Chinese ports, and US ports are getting little and little shipments. And I and, and I assume that in about 1 or 2 weeks' time, the real impact of this Liberation Day thing will really have an impact, will start to have an impact, a real impact. And no amount of negotiation at this time would be enough to stop that from happening, right? The sudden loss of trade. What do you think? What's your assessment on that?
I think there's no way just to compensate that because in the grand scheme of things, right? Unless Trump declares that the pre-Liberation Day tariffs comes back, then we can say, oh, it's a temporary impact on 1 or 2 months. But let's say if this becomes a long durée kind of war, then you have to withstand such a tariff, which means a lot of the trade is basically stopped, right? So one of the most sensitive thing that I've heard is that Temu, the Pinduoduo's US, all like a dupe version, right? And it's super popular in the US App Store. But I've heard that Temu has stopped basically its like massive advertising campaigns in the US. This means something, right? This means that people are feeling the impact of when it comes down to parcel tariffs or when it comes down to like, trade issues and all that. But that's just a snippet because probably Temu is easy to track, but there are smaller factories in China that could lay off a lot of workers because of the capacity issue. And some of the factories, they cannot find an alternative sort of a buyer, right? Because, for instance, a lot of the things aren't just catered to US customers. And so they will definitely close down or at least reduce their operation by a lot. And as a result of that, if you want to resume it, it takes time. And it's just like COVID, right? At COVID, it's not like you can press a pause button and just say, okay, the economy just went back on again. It takes probably 1 or 2 year time, even if you're willing to make it back to normal. The longer it holds, the more pain it will cause on both sides. And I think it's not going to be very pretty unless there's going to be some at least near-term resolution that, okay, because of the well-being of the two countries, we just want to take a pause here and maybe a 90-day pause or whatever. And at least by doing that, the stock market for the US will certainly go up. And then for China, obviously, a lot of the things can be done in terms of from a negotiation point of view. So I think that's probably my sense what it's going to be. But given how Trump has do the policy things in the second term, I'm not so optimistic that this thing will just get back to pre-liberation day immediately. So I think the pain is going to be there.
Agree, agree. So let's shift gears a little bit. So beyond trade war, there's actually a lot other things happening in China too. I think one thing that is really stands out for me is for the last 2 weeks, there have been several high-level events that are related to AI. So I think it's about 2 weeks ago, there was this Politburo study session about artificial intelligence, right? And that study session is basically the 20 something most important people in China sit together in a room, listen to a professor doing a lecture on artificial intelligence, on the global trends, and on China's position in that. It's a very important event. And I think this week, President Xi also visited Shanghai for, I think, 2 days, no more than 2 days. And the first place he visited was somewhere in the Xuhui district. And then there was this AI kind of incubator place where he also learned about the AI technologies and also made many statements about AI. So it couldn't be more obvious that the Chinese leadership view AI as a crucial piece of technological advancement. You are an investor, you are a venture capital investor, you invest in a lot of AI projects. What do you think? Is there any incremental information coming out of that? Or is there anything that surprised you or not?
I think it's not that surprising in terms of the resolve of the top leadership trying to develop its own AI industry, right? I think it's more of a like a double down, right? It's almost like after DeepSeek, it seems, oh, there's very little noise on our side, but actually, we're doing a lot of things concurrently trying to promote this industry. But I think it's also interesting in the joint study session that the top leadership admits that it still has a long way to catch up versus the US. I think this is referring to different things. Obviously, one is obviously the chip control, right? because of the stricter control by NVIDIA, not by NVIDIA, but by the Trump administration on NVIDIA, right? So it may cause some further bottlenecks for China to further develop its AI system, right? So that is obviously one of the very important items. But on top of which is also you need to basically have a better large language model, or you can call it application on top of it. I think basically the leadership admits that there is still some way to catch up on that, and that they place a lot of emphasis on that. The visit to Shanghai is a bit of a surprise for some people because obviously there's already DeepSeek, right? And it seems there's this Beijing event where founder of DeepSeek and several key tech leaders went to Beijing and to talk with President Xi and have this setting, right? So people thought, okay, it's already enough of a kind of a gesture for the top leadership to show support. But I think this time is a little bit different in that deliberately took a tour in Shanghai. I think then it's also a little bit about local politics because in the last 4 months, the thing you've heard is all about Hangzhou, right? The Hangzhou Six Dragons, which is led by DeepSeek. Obviously, there's a bunch of companies that are following on suite with DeepSeek, right? And then Hangzhou is becoming a very prominent location for startups or overall AI investment. But then there are other places in China that are not that satisfied with this sort of outcome, and they want some support. And Shanghai has obviously put a huge amount of effort trying to develop its own sort of companies, ecosystem, and all that. So I think this is a bit of a local politics in terms of balancing a little bit, right? You cannot just focus on one place, and you cannot just put eggs in one basket. And that's the same thing for the top leadership as well. So I do see a bit of that. And so I'm a little bit surprised that it's so swiftly after this joint studies that session that actually the Shanghai visit took place. But again, it's not surprising overall that Chinese leadership is very focused on AI.
That's true. That's true. Did you talk about that local politics thing partially also because you are a native Shanghainese and you want to see more happening to your hometown? That's good.
It's actually very funny because I was chatting a lot of, AI chatters with some of my industry friends, and some of them based in Shanghai, they're not even aware of this visit, even very like maybe 1 to 2 days even before that. So it is a very all of a sudden type of visit. But I do think it's complicated in the sense that, sure, like Shanghai wants to be like a innovative center of AI overall. But again, I think it all has to do with personnel as well. Who's in charge of Shanghai? What kind of effort has he put into sort of developing AI companies? And Beijing is also super focused on developing good AI companies in China. And I'm sure you've known that the Zhipu, which is one of the largest sort of AI LLM companies in China, is scheduled to be listed soon. And that I think, has an even huger impact on Shanghai's mentality in that, okay, that's too much. We have DeepSeek already, which is open source LLM. But then I have another competitor in Beijing that has been ahead in terms of from a listing perspective. So I do need a bit of a support. And I feel that I have a lot to show for the top leadership already. So I think that's the dynamic I've seen from a local politics point of view.
Yeah. And I think during Xi's visit in Shanghai, there was also another important event that he attended, and it was a symposium with several party secretaries of several different provinces, including Shanghai, but also many different other provinces all across China. And I think the main topic was really on how to prepare for the 15th plan, 5-year plan. in China. So we're at the final months of the 14th five-year plan, and the government is actually in the process of drafting the overall guideline for the next 5 years. And I think that's the moment where this process was really officially kicked off. Interestingly, a few days ago, I was talking with someone, a good friend who was working at a university as an administrator for the university, and he was basically saying that, and now every department, every university was very hyped in that they were preparing and they were trying to, and this is basically the moment for them to get to win more budget for their programs, and they're trying to align themselves better with those programs. And I think one thing that they really emphasize, just from what I heard, was right now a lot of policies about boosting domestic consumption, and so they were actually also trying to see how they will do that, right? And there are universities, how they will do that. Now it's actually possible for them to do a lot of these master programs or even foreign exchange programs or even foreign students program into their universities in China, in Shanghai. And the reason they are able to do that is now there's a central level policy directive at moving to more and more consumption, more and more spending. And then they're trying to think about ways to win more of those programs. So that's really important. And these 5 year plan was not like 5 year plans a few decades ago. It was not like we're not like a centralized planning economy now. But then it does set out some kind of direction, some kind of larger framework about how the state allocates assets and resources. So I think it's a really important thing to look after, to follow. Johnny, do you think there's anything that we should pay attention to this round, or anything that's really affecting your investment decisions, choices, whatever? Yeah.
There's a bit of a history here, which I think a lot of people don't know, is that the first 5 year plan, when it was first being raised by Mao back in early 1950s, there's a very interesting prediction he made with regards to the 5 year plan, which is very interesting, is that the 15th 5 year plan, we will see a very modernized China, whereby we're very likely going to surpass the economic volume that of the US. So that is the prediction he made in 1953, I think. I think that holds weight. People don't realize that actually it holds a lot of weight for especially the top leadership, because the whole essence of a 5 year plan, as you mentioned, right? We have surpassed that phase of a planned economy towards that of at least we have a market economy, right? There are some sectors that are not open to market forces, but a lot of the sectors is completely market oriented, right? Then what's the real need of a 5 year plan? I think you need to put things into perspective and into a real modern sort of state running perspective. Then you cannot say this is called 5 year plan, but rather we call it industrial policy, or you can call it different, sort of a combo of industrial policy for the next 5 years. And that is very common in any sort of state. Right? Industrial policy is extremely important. People talk about monetary policy, people talk about fiscal policy, but industrial policy is actually very important in any country's sort of policy making. And actually, for a lot of the industrial policy making for the Western states, it is typically very long term. It's never, oh, I'm just going to do industrial policy for next year. That's not going to work, because industrial policy is going to take time to take effect. So a 5 year industrial policy cycle is no joke, first of all. And second, I think it has a very important weight for the overall leadership. So I want to stress that, because the historical context actually matters a lot in terms of a lot of things in China. And I then think the interesting sort of situation here is that really we have come to the new norm where, you know, even if let's say the tariff thing get down a little bit, right? It's going to be a prolonged sort of US pressure overall on decoupling with China. And under such a decoupling sort of a context, what is China going to do in response to that? And it's going to be reflected in a lot of the 5-year plans, especially when it comes down to different ministries. So I'm actually very curious how different ministries or sectors, or you can call it different localities, respond to such a drastic shift when it comes down to a sort of a global event, right? Because we have, since 2001, since we entered into WTO, enjoy or bear the fruits of globalization. And that has come to an end pretty much after 2025. So the 2025 till 2030, the plan going to be drastically different from that of the last five-year plans. So I'm actually very curious how that's going to play a role on the, not only from an investment point of view, but on the sort of just from the well-being of a country, or how you're going to develop your own ecosystem and all that. It's going to be a drastic shift.
I really love your characterization of these 5-year plans as China's industry policy. It totally makes sense. I've never thought about this in this way. I've never heard about people talking about this way. I always wonder whether the 5-year plans still had the same kind of impact or effect as before. But I think what you said was like what was really mind blowing for me. I think the maybe the last thing that I personally will want to talk about or want to raise up is there was this little news item recently that China was going to lift the sanctions on some European members of the parliaments, which was a problem back then. I think it's during 2019 when there was this big argument between China and Europe back and forth that ultimately derail the CAI, the kind of a big investment agreement between China and EU back then. I think we've talked about this many times, and especially when the Chen was with us for the last few episodes, that we would talk about this closer integration between China and EU under this Trump 2.0 world. And I think, what we're seeing now is really moving towards that kind of vision. And we are like slowly and gradually clearing all the obstacles for this closer integration. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Johnny?
I think we've talked about improvement, potential improvement of China-EU relations for some time now. I think the biggest obstacle towards all that is still two things. One is obviously the overall EU industry has a bit of an overlap with China, right? And so one of the key items that is on top of the agenda is to talk about potential minimum price for Chinese EV entering into Europe. And so that is going to be an issue because EV is just one of them. I think the overall EU sentiment is very against a massive flood of Chinese products diverting from the US into Europe because it will cause a lot of problems for EU companies from their perspective. So I think that's one of the key I think the second one is still the Russian-Ukrainian war. As we all know that in a few days' time, President Xi is going to go to Moscow to attend a very important military parade hosted by Vladimir Putin. From the Chinese perspective, again, China wants to honor the history of the success of World War II alliance with the Soviet Union, as well as with the US, actually. But from a lot of Western point of view, especially in the European point of view, they certainly didn't view it this way. They think that this is an advocate of the Putin administration. And that will definitely cause a lot of trouble for China EU to get back on track, because I think a lot of the EU states are still very much in a sort of a clear enemy sort of mode against Russia. And even if Donald Trump doesn't care anything about the Russian-Ukrainian war, as long as they sign the mining treaty with Ukraine, that doesn't mean this thing goes away with EU. It seems like they want to double down supporting Ukraine against Russia. I'm not sure how that's going to unfold, but I'm pretty sure that the political trust as well as the economic backdrop of the whole negotiation between China and EU is not as optimistic as one may envision.
Yeah, that's true. So I think we're about time for this episode. Is there any other comment you want to add?
This is a small thing. Probably you know better than I do, is that this May 1st festival proves to be the crowdiest May 1st
Yeah.
festival for Chinese in the travel history. Now, Chinese is very used to sort of huge crowd, but I think this one is clearly utterly memorable because some of the footage out there is unbelievable.
Yes, I think I do know it better than you do. You're right now in Hong Kong, right? You didn't get to experience this whole thing. I am in your hometown, Shanghai, and we even didn't think about it vacationing. I think during the third day of our holiday, we decided to drive north a little bit across Yangtze River to the Jiangsu city of Nantong and these places. Actually, funnily, we chose the very famous project by Evergrande, Venice at Sea in Qidong, facing the sea, serving a lot of these Shanghai home buyers. Even there, actually, the crowd there surprised us. We thought it was like a old, round down project, a failure of China's real estate golden age. But it turns out it was super crowded. We actually took a half an hour to leave that compound today. And we were originally planning to come back to Shanghai, but on our way, we saw the highway, the bridge between and Shanghai, and it would took us about 3 hours to just finish the drive on the Yangtze River. So we just decided to drop off at Ling Island, which is directly opposite downtown Shanghai. And right now, at this very moment, we were spending a night in Chongming just to avert the traffic. So it was really crazy, I would say. Even if these are not the most touristy place in China, it's still very crowded.
Robert, you're completely wrong about Hong Kong because it's completely packed these
Really?
days.
Oh,
If you
really?
go to anywhere that is central or like a touristy, there will be a huge wave waiting for you. It's a different scene. And obviously, people have complained here in Hong Kong previously that there's more people going outbound rather than inbound. But this time, because of the May 1st festival, I think the inbound tourist has reached a new high, or at least some scene I've never seen before. So you need to, wait for 2 to 3 hours just to get on a ride to the peak. Hong Kong is part of China, so
Yeah, I mean, we have
there's no way you can
yeah,
avoid that.
yeah. We have 1.4 billion people, and those people, if you give them the enough chance, the consumption potential is huge. I just have to say, yeah. Cool. Cool. Maybe let's call it a day for this episode. And let's hope Chen will finish his studies next week and rejoin us again.
Cool. We're gonna
Cool.
talk next
Okay.
week.
Great. See you later.